really sit down and think about what's going to be better than what everybody else is doing. What's the story you're going to tell? I think that's what you need to create a good story and ultimately put on a good event or a good webinar.
We're live. Welcome, friends, to Vision to Vibe, the podcast where we dive into the creative minds of leaders who are shaping the future of B2B marketing. I'm your host, as always, Nick Salvatoriello, and today we're vibing with none other than my friend of over 10 years in the B2B marketing world. It's amazing to think about that, Gabe, right? Mr. Gabe Wahhab. Gabe is a marketing innovator. He's got a design developer background. He has built and sold a couple of companies. We've worked in the same companies before, helped onboard his agency to HubSpot way back in the day. He's launched some incredible products and services at HubSpot. I want to talk about that with him and with you all. So Gabe, welcome to the show. And are you ready to get into talking about how you can turn some ideas into experiences that really stick with audiences?
I'm so ready. Thanks for having me so much, Nick.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm glad we got to do this, man. I know we were talking about doing this for a while. But, you know, you had things like, I don't know, participating in the Jiu-Jitsu World Championship and stuff like that that kept you away. Let's take a quick fun fact sidebar. Gabe, ever since I've known you, you've had an interest in martial arts and playing competitively, right?
Yeah, big, huge grappler. Love grappling. Wrestled in college. I was All-American wrestler in college. Transitioned that jiu-jitsu after college. Became a world champion in that as well. And just had a small break right now for some other projects. And then looking forward to getting back here in like a month.
Well, I appreciate you squeezing this in. And you are truly a Renaissance man. And let's see if we can grapple with some of the challenges that our audience has around getting their companies and their audiences aligned around major products, major new initiatives when they launch them. You've really made some waves and did some real noticeable impact in your efforts there at HubSpot. But before we get there, let's just kick things off with your journey, Gabe, because everybody comes to marketing from different places. So what first drew you into marketing, and more specifically, the area of design and development, where you had your first firm, and that's where I first met you? Like, was there a moment when you realized, like, this is what I want to do, not only marketing, design, development, but to do this is your own business and your own agency?
My journey is actually pretty interesting, especially when it comes to marketing. So I started my business when I was a freshman in college, and I just like to play around building websites. I really like to play around with tech and IT. And I had an architecture firm reach out to me, and they were like, hey, can you build us a website? And I was like, yeah, why not? And they were like, well, we'll pay you $25 an hour. Now, granted, this is right around the dot-com boom, and $25 an hour for a kid in college where everybody else was making like $7 an hour. I was like, this is awesome, right?
Amen.
So I was like, yeah.
Struck it rich.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely build a website for you. They referred me to another client where I did some IT work for them. Now, this is like when I'm going to really date myself here, but
not to me, you won't.
This is 56K modem land, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is like DSL is just getting introduced.
You know, the whole thing.
Yeah. So they hired me to custom build some computers that would connect to some cameras and display them online. And so this was one image every 30 seconds, like the first webcams like you've ever seen that were just security cams.
Yeah.
But look, they used to have to pay a guy to go around to every single location 2 times a day. 10, I think it was 10 locations. Now they could just go up, look and at the images and see, is the place open? Is everything being done as it's supposed to be done? You know, et cetera. And then from there, I kept getting referrals. But the marketing part's actually funny because as I was kind of starting my business, you know, my mom would tell me, you have to do some marketing. You know, you can't just rely on this word of mouth thing. And I would just be like, marketing, that's garbage. Nobody needs marketing, you know, do it fine. So I was like totally against marketing to start. But then, you know, as I continued to grow the business, you know, as I finished college and then I went, you know, started hiring my first employees, then I'm like, all right, okay, I do have to look into this marketing thing. And so then we started doing marketing. And the first thing that I really started to dive deep into with marketing was actually HubSpot, how we met, right?
Yes.
And so another kind of blast from the past here, I hired a current HubSpotter right now, Luke Summerfield, who is
That's
also a
right.
good friend of mine, who I met through jujitsu and grappling. And I said, hey, Luke, I said, the first thing I want you to do is go deep into this HubSpot thing, right?
Oh yeah.
And Luke essentially created the marketing function within our business, created like the retainers, the programs, the packages. And then from there, I learned and got hooked on marketing. And then that's really was my real entrance from moving over from the web world and the IT world, because that's what I was focused on, is building these websites. Now, granted, that was with a marketing, a conversion focused marketing spin. We weren't just creating brochure websites, we were
No.
creating conversion focused websites. And so, but then that's what kind of transitioned me over into content creation and lead nurturing. And, inbound used to be so simple back then. It was
Oh my gosh.
just a few channels and a few things, and now it's exploded.
Oh yeah.
But
HubSpot,
man,
the product was so simple back then.
Yeah.
We were working mostly with small business owners and occasionally like the one or two marketers at medium-sized organizations. They're just looking for that Swiss Army knife that wasn't too fancy. And I remember, Gabe, because I was working mostly with agencies and building out our agency services channel and our partner channel there. And I get you and Luke on the phone, and I start showing you the landing page tool, and you guys just tore it up. You're like, hey man, this thing has got limited functionality. These templates are not great. This is really clunky. Look at the customs. And you guys were creating really beautiful custom things in WordPress. I remember even going to my manager. I'm like, he called us out on it. It's right there. It's not good. I was getting better, obviously. Like any SaaS firm, we were iterating. This was April 2011, probably something like that. But I'll never forget that. I said, wow, these guys have got taste. They know better. They've seen better. They've built better. And then you guys eventually became innovators in adopting and utilizing HubSpot's CMS tool, and eventually you became an evangelist for it. So maybe you can just talk to us before we get into that HubSpot journey, how you literally came properly into the HubSpot company, and just to talk about that, the creative side, the design process side that you started to fall in love with instead of just the operational and the IT side. Why do you think, especially even today, as much as it was back then, that you guys had a taste for it, but now, why is it so important to make sure that creativity and design are being taken care of, along with the operations and the text and stuff like that, in a world where B2B marketing can sometimes feel, let's just say it, like a little dry?
Yeah. I mean, look, if you look at what grabs attention these days, especially in a world with AI, and look, I love AI and it does a great job, but it can help you create ideas. But I think that true creativity and really being able to capture people and capture their attention, that's more important now than it's ever been before, right? It's so flooded out there with content. It's so flooded, and it's just gonna get worse and worse, that you need to be able to capture people, and you need to be able to like hook them. And great design, great creativity does that, to a T. It's so critically important to be able to do that. That's extremely important. But that's, in those days, that's what we prided ourselves on. We prided ourselves on being creative. We prided ourselves on a really high quality product. And so we were very critical. When I saw HubSpot, though, we knew it wasn't there, especially at that time. But we saw the future vision, and that's why we
all did.
We stuck with it.
Yep.
And so eventually, that's what brought me into HubSpot. I sold my company to the largest partner at the time, and then HubSpot actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, you've been with HubSpot a long time. You have this great knowledge. We'd love to, see if you'd be a good fit for this role." And ultimately, I was, and then spent the last 2.5 years at HubSpot, and in both a go-to-market and product marketing role there, and just really, I felt like did a great job and had some amazing results there.
Well, I want to talk about that now. But before we do, can you just tell us, like, what was that like, that moment where you just said that you've been working with one of HubSpot's largest partners. They had acquired your firm prior to that. And then HubSpot reaches out and says, we want you to come here to Big Orange and actually do this at scale for everybody, for all the partners, for all the customers, and evangelize the HubSpot suite and stuff like that. Did you have a thought as to, oh my gosh, this is going to be scary now because I'm going, or this is where I want to make my mark? What was your thought process, how you were going to tackle that opportunity of coming into the beating heart of inbound?
Yeah. So it's actually interesting because when they first approached me, I said, no, I'm actually good.
Oh man.
But then it was actually Luke, because Luke, worked, we worked together. Luke worked there. And Luke was the one who was recruited me to the team. And at first I told him like, look, no, I'm actually pretty happy here. And he said, no, look, I really think you'd be a good fit for this. It's great working here. And so I started to kind of explore it a little bit more. And then, then I came over to the team. And then once on the inside, it's definitely different than what you expect. The first thing was a lot of excitement because I got to see all the things that are coming and all the things that are on the roadmap and the things that you just don't see, when you're on the outside. So that was like kid in a candy store. Yeah. But I think one of the things that was so interesting to me was there was just such a lack of process. Process is very loose, so it still very much functions like a well-organized startup in a lot of ways. And so like I'm used to agency, like everything has a process because you need to be so efficient. You have to be so, you got to maximize that profit because profit margins can be pretty low. So everything has a process. It has efficiency where there wasn't really much of a process. And I think there was also, when I came in, I was like, I can't believe there isn't enough process. And I almost pushed back on it a little, but there was a very specific reason is because like we talked about earlier, they wanted that creativity. They didn't want just cookie cutter launches. They didn't want just cookie cutter items. They wanted you to use your creativity. They wanted you to bring big ideas to the table. And so process can sometimes be a killer of that. And that was part of the reason for not having such a deep process and almost not wanting it is it's light process. And that is to kind of encourage that creativity and out of the box thinking.
That's exactly right. And before we get into how you took that freedom and that desire to be creative and to come up with something very unique and impactful for your launch events for the products and the suite that you were evangelizing, can we also take a beat and acknowledge that as a partner, and you and I have the most experience in the HubSpot partner channel, but there was a reason why you were almost hesitating. You'd think, oh my gosh, you're a partner of HubSpot, the software company. Now they're reaching out and inviting you to go and work at the company. Wouldn't that be the natural progression? Wouldn't that be the way to access the true like kernel of what it is to use HubSpot and so on? But I just want to take a beat and celebrate that HubSpot's partner channel. You got to work with some of the best customers very extensively. You got to go real deep sometimes on lots of features that you now have experienced as an employee, as have I, that sometimes you don't have time to really dive into because it's not your job anymore. It's not the main focus. There's a lot of different people who handle this. There's a ton of information coming at you from different corners. So I just want to celebrate that being a HubSpot partner what is sometimes a situation where you might say, hey, I'm good versus going to work at the big orange sprocket because you get to actually work with the customers so deeply, at least at leading HubSpot partners, right?
Yeah, 100%. You definitely don't get to go into the product as deep, I think, as you'd like. And I'll say that, look, I was CMS Hub, Content Hub. And when I was there, that was like my focus. So like all this amazing stuff on Sales Hub was launching, all these customizations and so on. And I kind of hear mentions of them breezing by me, but I couldn't really keep up on that because I was super focused on Content Hub. But when you're a partner, especially in the areas that I was in, every hub, like I was on top of it. And when I would talk to my CAM, he'd be like, way more than me at this because you're on top of it as a partner.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
Man, and the amount of stuff that's coming out is just ridiculous. There's hundreds of features being launched and it's crazy. It's so hard to keep on top of everything these days.
Oh, it was a sweet ride. So let's take us back then to that moment you're talking about. You got this golden opportunity. You're now working at HubSpot. You're working with your good friend, Luke, and you have a chance to really focus on an area of the product suite that you're passionate about, which is the CMS, the content management system, the hub, and the content hub that feeds that whole thing. That must have been huge. And tell us about how you got the assignment. Like, what did it look like when they finally said, Gabe, we want you to plan a launch event for this? Or was that your idea? How'd you go about the vision of coming up with how you wanted to help launch and evangelize some of the newest features in those hubs?
Yeah, I mean, we were just seeing what the future of CMS Hub was going to look like. And look, CMS, it was a difficult product to sell. It was very technical. It didn't have a big ARR necessarily for sales to want to sell it. So that was a little bit of an issue. But there was really this big need in the market for really a content creation system, a content management system that went beyond just the CMS. And so this actually had a lot to do with Luke, and this is Content Hub, I'd say, as an idea, was really Luke's baby, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
he did a lot of that work in creating the strategy behind, like, this is what we want to do. And then it was time to launch that. And so when it came to launch it, we organized our PMM structure by hub. And so I
Mm-hmm.
was the content hub PMM, the CMS hub PMM at that time. And so it was then my baby to say, all right, here's my time to shine. We have a big launch. Because when I came in, we had just launched free. And so there wasn't like a big launch moment. And so finally it
Mm-hmm.
came like, all right, yes, I finally get this big launch to dive into.
For the more
And then
premium features, like that you want people to upgrade into. So you actually, if
yes,
I recall, you had a two-pronged approach. One is to bring in net new customers, drive that awareness that HubSpot has this functionality now. It's bigger and better than ever in this area. Come on in and sign up. But then also for the existing customers that were hanging out on the free plan or something like that, you're saying, come on upgrade here. Like now's the time
yes.
to finally invest and dive in because we've got the features you can't live without. You had to pull
Yeah.
that
And
off.
I mean, if you look at a launch strategy, your lowest hanging fruit is going to be your customers who are there for you already, right? You have
Yeah.
low hanging fruit, and that's both from people who already have CMS Hub who may want to upgrade to Content Hub, or people who don't have CMS or Content Hub because maybe they didn't need a website product, but now it's a content product. So maybe now you do need that. And so you have some really good low hanging fruit there that you can tap into, as well as bringing it out to the public and launching it to the public as a whole as well.
So when you had this opportunity, Gabe, they said, all right, we need you as a product marketing manager to plan a launch event for these new HubSpot products and features and suites. Can you walk us through what your process is? Did you already have a vision in mind? How did you come up with this is how I want to go about it and not have it come off as sort of a templated, only process driven, non-creative driven
Yeah.
approach?
I mean, look, HubSpot's a big organization, right? 10,000 people almost, huge marketing department, lots of specialization areas. And so it's starting to think about where do we need to be, which is pretty much everywhere, right? So you have to think about sales enablement. You have to think about training, right? I have to train and have sales ready. I need to train and have CS ready. I need to have support ready to answer these questions.
Mm-hmm.
You have to think about, what are we going to do for web? What are we going to do for SEO? What are we going to do for competitive intelligence? What are we going to do to enable sales? What materials do we have to create? So it's going around all these different departments and then understanding, well, what are their goals? How can I fit into these goals? How do I influence them? Because I have no way to tell this person, you need to work on this launch. I have to influence them to be like, this is a good idea for you to work on this launch because this doesn't fit into your goals, right?
Yes,
And
that
we
is
have to
always
do
the
that.
challenge of somebody who's in a position like you've been and I've been with my clients is I've got to get this person to give their discretionary time. Like I got to get them to see how this is worth their time. They don't have to do this. There's no direct line from me to them. I have to convince them this is in their own best interest, as well as like the company and the customer's interest, right? Were there any sound bites, any things that you did, any like vignettes that come to mind from those various conversations across those departments that you felt like this helped?
I mean, it's really just understanding at the most part how that person is goaled and
Yeah.
then how you can fit into the goal and help them. It's like, what's in it for me, right? Because it's
Yes.
not about me, it's about them. So
Right.
it's what's in it for them. How do you tailor it to them? But that's just then starting off, right? You have to create this full strategy. And so then once you get all the people aligned and on board, I need to be in this area, this area, this area, this area. I need this person. Then you start to kind of put together, okay, what are we going to do for this area? And you co-plan with them. And then which areas am I going to be responsible for? And what ideas am I going to bring to the table for that? And so you put together this big strategy, which then on top of, you have to create messaging for features, and you have to create messaging for the hub as a whole. And so it's planning all this out, and then it's dividing and conquering and staying on top and leading that charge for those hundreds of people who are involved with this launch to then be able to move everybody in the right direction on the marketing team, move everybody in the right direction on the sales team, bring all the feedback that I'm getting from this initial messaging and bring that back to product, and making sure that product is aligning and building features and the roadmap is aligning with what the market is looking for. And so it's a lot of alignment. It's a lot of kind of ambiguity and navigating ambiguity, and then just bringing that into one plan and then pushing forward.
What were
And
some of your
so
favorite platforms or tools that you'd like to use to house some of those inputs, due dates, deliverables, stakeholders? Like, was it Airtable, your favorite spreadsheet, using Asana? What were some of the tools? Brand is irrelevant to me. I'm just thinking the style of tools. Where did some of that live, or did it live across a few different places?
it's pretty simple, honestly. It's a strategy deck that you're kind of everybody's collaborating on. It's Google Drive, and it's Asana. You know, we use Asana internally, and so we kind of got everything organized in Asana.
Isn't it
And
interesting that in order to get all these stakeholders on board with a big presentation that you're effectively going to be giving, which is what the webinar can be, that you had to basically give a miniature presentation over and over and over again? Like, you had to make the first sale and the first presentation, which is to them, to make the big presentation to the audience.
yes, it's so much internal selling just to get everybody aligned first, and then yes, to get it to market, and then once you get it to market, then it's external selling.
Yeah. Must have felt pretty amazing, though, when you started to see all the different vectors to start to align. I know from my experience, once you start to go, wow. And you can also feel it in the departments where they go, thank you, Gabe or Nick or whoever, like, thank you for being the quarterback on this, because I've got my piece and I want my message to get out, or I want my channel to really sing with this message, but I can't do the rest. And thank goodness I'm not the one who has to be the front person. Do you ever get some of that gratitude or encouragement from other stakeholders who are like, thank you for running point?
Oh, absolutely. And I have to give a thank you too, because once we started to get into this project, it was just me to start, and this is like a massive launch, and I don't think we've ever had a launch of that size that only had one person. And then I think at some point during that, about halfway through, they recognized, okay, we need to bring another PMM into this. And then we were able to bring in Steph, who is the PMM, who then kind of co-helped me launch this project then. And she was, hugely valuable. She played a big part in the launch then as well. And we kind of divided and conquered on the project to take everything that I had started with messaging and go to market strategy and so on. And then we said, okay, here's what the parts that I'm going to take. Here's the parts you're going to take, just to get that over to the finish line, because it was such a massive launch. I don't think there's no way I would have been successful as a single PMM launching something that big.
However, I do want to pin down a takeaway for our audience here, because I've said this from stage before, which is to begin every project, if you're the main resource, the main manager for the project, which it sounds like you definitely were in the beginning, like, have the mindset of the cavalry is not coming. Like, Gabe Wahhab did not sit back and go, well, I deserve another PMM here to back me up. And if this is such a big deal to the company, how come everybody isn't just coming to me on this? You have to go first, show the world your tail lights and dust, show them some progress, show them some outsized like productivity with a minimal amount of resource. And then they go, wow, there's something going here. If you just sat there at the starting line, I don't know if that help would have been so forthcoming.
And look, I mean, at the end of the day, it just would have meant a smaller launch. We wouldn't have been able to do as much versus adding a second PMM. We were just able to accomplish so much more by doing that. And so that just ultimately got down to the end result, which was a massively good result with the end of the launch.
Yeah, no massive launch, I think we've established here, is achieved on an island, is achieved by superhero efforts by a single person. Although it does take, what we're hearing here, and I know from my experience, some strong, thoughtful personalities to be able to meet with all those various stakeholders and get them to want to become one team, one dream around that, even if it's just for the launch itself. Yep. So, okay, you got it done, Gabe. You met with the different stakeholders. You got additional resources and a good sort of co-pilot, co-launcher on board. Now you're getting ready for the event. Is there anything you can tell us about the creative process, how you prepped for the big show, the big launch, which is really what that was all about? All this prep is to make sure you get the right message out at the right time to the right audience in that webinar and that recording. So can you just tell us about what that was like, what your approach was, putting together the content and really getting that show ready for the quality program that it was?
Yeah. I mean, once we had the go-to-market strategy, and one thing I didn't mention too is that we did a lot of internal interviewing to understand what people actually needed for the launch. And I think that was part of what made it successful, because, sales needs to have a certain amount of materials. And so I said, hey, in past launches, what didn't you get? What do you really need? And they said, this is it. And so I really was able to focus on the areas that they said they really needed for sales enablement, for training, and so on. and made sure that they were successful in that area. But then, getting ready for the big show, you're getting everybody aligned, you're getting everybody trained ahead of time. We ran into some challenges there because HubSpot's launching so many different things.
Yes.
It was hard to get that rep mind share and get them trained, right? So we had to get really crafty with how we were training them, and then training before. What are we doing to train after? What are we doing to support, right? Support channels on Slack, individual segment-based training that was happening afterwards that I was personally, doing with those teams and helping them understand, for your segment, these are the features to focus on. This is how you should pitch it. These are the pains that you're going to encounter. These are the sales motions that you should go into, and being able to do that training. And so there's a lot of different aspects I can think of when you go to the big show and do that big launch. But really, it's about getting everything ready, getting everybody trained, and then going through that process of run of show. Here's everything that's going to launch. Here's what's launching when. Here's what we're doing on which days. Here's what's happening before. Here's what's happening on the day of. Here's what's happening after. It's massive. You look at the hundreds of things that are happening at this point, especially for a product of this size, and it's massive, the amount of people involved in these launches. And so that's where Asana is clutch at that point.
Absolutely. Good project management best practices and making sure you can keep everybody on track and on the same page. There's so many moving parts in the launch itself. What you're talking about isn't even just like the launch event, the webinar itself. These are all the things that have to happen before and afterwards, beyond the mechanics of that run of the show that you did allude to.
And the webinar we're talking about, that didn't even happen till 2 weeks, I believe, after the launch, or like something. I believe it was like 2 or 3 weeks after the actual launch. So
was that okay? Did that work out okay?
I think it worked out more than okay.
It's a cool takeaway for people, because you've been there. Organizations sometimes can say it's all got to happen on this day. I've been a part of it. There's nothing we're talking about is exclusive to HubSpot. Many software companies and enterprises can make some of these choices, have some of these challenges. And there has been in the past, we all know it, the feeling of it's all got to happen on this day. New website, new event, email goes out, webinar happens same day, sales reps pick up the phone. If it all has to happen on the same day, or it's going to get dissipated. Is that myth or fact in your experience?
It's 100% myth, because we actually took the complete opposite approach. When we launched, when that day that we actually launched, it was more of like a soft launch. The product went to the market, the sales team could start selling it, but we didn't have a big marketing push behind it. Specifically because something goes wrong,
Yep.
a lot of egg on your face, right?
Right.
So it's more of a soft launch. We waited 2 to 3 weeks before we really started pushing into that bigger launch motion. Mm-hmm. And so we were doing some light things, but the actual launch of when the product went live wasn't this big grand motion. It was like, let's launch it.
It's on. It's sellable now. They're talking about it now in one-to-one conversations, but we're not going to pour it on yet. We're not going to do the full groundswell until we know our troops are ready.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that allowed us to kind of let the market test it, let the market get into the market's hands, let us see if there's any errors that are popping up. Because the last thing you want is to have this big giant push of a campaign, and then all of a sudden something's breaking, you're getting negative reviews, et cetera, et cetera. So, we wanted to give that little soft cooling period and then start to go hard with it.
And it worked. So here we are. We're at the actual webinar itself. It's been a couple of weeks. You've done all the project management, stakeholder engagement, and enablement prep that you possibly can. But one thing that stands out when I watched the event itself, Gabe, is that you aimed to make the audience feel something. You began with story. You began with heavy visuals. There's so much pressure when you're doing a product-centric promotional push to simply educate. Fact, stats, features, speeds and feeds, that type of thing. And yet you seem to intuitively understand you got to entertain the audience a little bit with story, with imagery, with a little bit of the unexpected, with some anecdotes, with a smirk and a smile. You made a jab at Google Plus. You're like, oh wait, we also had to make sure to launch on Google Plus. He's like, but back then that was a thing. Anyways, can you just take us through how you made sure that people felt something, how you solved for the feeling that the audience should have, not just the stats and information that they should take in, so that they didn't get confused?
So I wanted to put myself in the audience's shoes, right? And I was in the audience's shoes. I was on that other side. I did own a business. I did use HubSpot a lot for that business. And I experienced a lot of the pains that they had. And so first, I had to understand what those pains were. I had to understand what they were looking for in the market. And that came up in our messaging process and understanding that messaging. So more important than anything is understanding your domain. It's understanding your audience. It's understanding your competitors. And so that's kind of like the precursor to all of this is you have to do all that. And that just came out as a natural part of the launch and the creation of the messaging that we had. But then I wanted to be able to say, how does this relate to you? And so I inserted my own personal story into that. I wanted to start out by saying like, hey, look at, this is me. I was in your seat and I had these exact same pains. And I feel your pain and I understand what it's like. And now today I want to show you what the solution to that is that we've just created. And so it was a little bit of starting out with that. But then we also understood like AI is going crazy right now. Marketers are extremely busy. They don't really a lot of marketers don't understand it. They don't understand how to use it. Maybe they've gone into ChatGPT and got some really dry formal, responses. And so I wanted to show them that, look, I know you have some AI hesitation here. We just built this great product, which has a lot of AI in it and has a lot of those benefits in it. But I wanted to overcome that hesitation that they may have had. So I brought in another partner who could also talk about it. So they're not just hearing from me. And we just had a conversation about AI, right? And we were talking about, hey, here's how we're using AI in our day-to-day. Here's how it's become indispensable to us. Here's how it's creating efficiencies for us. So it was just starting out with a general AI conversation to kind of say, like, we're in your shoes as well, and here's how we're doing this. So it was very much understanding the customer, relating the customer, and then it was then showing them the product and starting to make them the hero. Because with any storyline, right, you have a challenge and you have somehow how you want to make the person in that story the hero of it, right? And so we said, here's what you're experiencing, here's your pains, here are your challenges. Now let's make you the hero of part of that story. So then as we start to show the product, because that was the next part of it, and this was all very deliberately crafted. Now that we want to make you part of that story, let me show you the product and how the products can make you the hero, right? This is the pain you maybe had. Like, you have to create content for LinkedIn, you have to create it for email, you have to create it for all these different channels, right? And that's super difficult to do. Let me show you now how I can make you the hero by using content remix and very quickly creating content for multiple channels at once. So now you can be in a lot of channels all at once, and you create these efficiencies. And it's laying out feature by feature of like, how do I make you the hero? How do I make you the hero?
And this is functionality about Content Hub you're describing that you described.
Now it's, yes, Content Hub and what we just launched and kind of getting them excited. And then as soon as we show them all that, then before we transition to our Q&A, then we have a little survey that pops up that said, hey, by the way, if you're interested in what you saw and want a personalized demo for yourself, just fill in yes in this survey. And man, the results were like crazy for how many leads we had and people like filling that in, and the results that we had from that of people who wanted to talk to sales, the percentage was like very, very high. And
I love those types of sort of interstitial CTAs, whether they're like explicit or you verbally put them, you drop a bit.ly or something in the chat, and then you have lead gen and opt-in before your webinar is even done. There's nothing better as a producer.
And so at the end of the day, though, then this ended up being the most successful webinar.
Yeah, talk to us about some of the outcomes here. I mean, you don't have to get into specifics. We're not here for that. But like in general, what was the types of outcomes that were meaningful first to you and then to the rest of the stakeholders who were counting on you to deliver?
Yeah. So, I mean, with this, we wanted to generate demand, and demand generates revenue, right? And, we were measuring, we look at how much ARR is this webinar generating over a long term.
In terms of new opportunities, deal sizes and stuff like that, forecasts and things.
Yep. So no, we don't look right away. So we're not, initially just, yes, you're looking at metrics like how many people signed up, how many people attended, how many people raised their hand, right? So you can get those metrics right away.
Sure.
But the long-term view of what we're doing is we're looking at how much ARR did this webinar generate? How many people that attended this webinar were influenced to then make a purchase of that specific product? And we can actually track that. Now, you have a sales cycle that takes some time, so you have to typically wait 90 days to see the results of that. This webinar did so well that in the first 60 days, we could measure the effect of it, and we could see that millions in revenue were being generated just from this one webinar. So we had millions in ARR being generated just off of this. And so from that ARR number, that was then saying, this is the best webinar that we've ever had, both from the front end of how many people registered and converted, but then also then on the back end from an ARR standpoint for this specific type of webinar that we held. And so, it's important not just to look at those initial vanity metrics, but that's the great thing about HubSpot and having these resources is that we can track that all the way through the process and say, this webinar had a major influence on these buying decisions, and we could see the amount of revenue that was influenced and came out of that.
And was there anything else you think our audience should understand that was useful in terms of your ability to pull off one of these most impactful and largest webinars? We talked about project management, truly understanding your persona, both the internal customer, the different stakeholders inside the organization that need to benefit from what you're doing, but then the actual external customer that you're trying to reach out and influence to upgrade, to sign up and engage. Is there anything else that you felt was key in terms of the timing, your approach, the content itself, the alignment that you got, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's important. I just provided the content and created the content, right? You still have to get it out there. And so I had somebody else that was working internally who was then helping set up the landing page for it, who was then helping promote it, who was then, talking to sales and getting their sales reps and CS reps to attend, the webinar for those that was relevant to it. And so it's not just necessarily, yes, you have to have really great content for the webinar, but you also have an entire team of people who are helping you out that you need to align around and get the word out to help promote that. I think that's where somebody like you, Nick, is so valuable in both of those aspects in helping manage events and webinars and so on. And for people that don't have a HubSpot-sized team to help them out with that, that's where somebody like you can actually help and supplement and bring and come in.
Well, thank you, Gabe, for recognizing that, because I recognize it too. There's really at least two different solid disciplines there. One is like making a really educational and entertaining and therefore engaging show, a great piece of content. That's a skill in and of itself. Do you think like Steven Spielberg is also worrying about making the previews and filling seats for the movie theater? No, those people, the director of the show is going to make an amazing show. And then there's another group that says, we've got a great show coming up here. I'm going to focus entirely on promoting whatever's to be shown currently and getting the audience in, that the producer fills the seats, the director and so on creates a great show. And you don't have to be either or, but you need to understand those are two separate skill sets, and you need someone owning both and treating those both as equally valuable and important disciplines, to be sure. Yeah. So thank you for calling that out, because I think sometimes organizations overlook one or the other. Oftentimes they know we got to get the word out to a lot of people, but then the show is not worth, in terms of how it's positioning, the webinar itself, the topic, it's going to be overly promotional, overly salesy, and nobody wants to sign up just to hear a sales pitch. They want to hear a story that's starring them, like you said. So in closing here, Gabe, this is really juicy stuff. It's rare that we get to talk to people who were soup to nuts from scratch, helping put on some of the most successful launch webinars for some of the biggest brands that are out there. So for marketers and creators out there listening, whether they're at a HubSpot-sized organization or they're a solopreneur, what's one thing they can start doing today to start planning and putting down and creating marketing experiences that don't just talk at their audiences about features and stuff, but actually resonate and make them feel like they're the star of this journey? For those people who are thinking, I want what Gabe's got, how can they start to take the first step if they've got a vision for a launch like this and bring it to life?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think a couple things. One, understand your audience, right? More important than anything, understand your audience, understand their pains and needs. But then two, you want to have a level of creativity. You want to have a level of story that comes along with that, right? There's a lot of different messaging frameworks out there. So if you don't use a messaging framework, look into them. They're, the hero story, the hero arc is one of the more popular ones
That's
that
right.
of
Pro
course
tip,
gets
have a
used.
framework, have a messaging framework of some kind, right?
To power those frameworks, you have to understand what the challenges are and how you're going to make that person the hero, or how it's going to fit into that. One of the things that's easy to get caught in as marketers get extremely busy is really just sit down and think about creativity and what you can bring to the table, and what's not just going to be the same as what everybody else is doing. You're just going to meld in and be the same as what everybody else is. You got to bring something unique, and you got to bring something different to the table. You got to have a good hook. And so really sit down and think about what's going to be better than what everybody else is doing. What's going to resonate with your customer? What's the story you're going to tell? I think that's what you need to create a good story and ultimately put on a good event or a good webinar.
Well, the proof is in the pudding, Gabe. You were thoughtful about your approach. You were earnest and forthright about wanting to put on something great that worked for everybody. And you showed that by the effort that you described to us, that you put in, starting with the internal stakeholders. What do you need? What's worked well in the past? How can we innovate? And then going straight to the audience and saying, what do you folks want to hear? And how can I make sure I relate to you? So this has been awesome. Just an amazing conversation that we get to crack open some very successful product launch events and campaigns and how they work and how others can follow in your footsteps. So thanks for sharing with us those insights and letting us into your creative process. And for our listeners here, if you want help creating launch events or marketing experiences that go from vision to vibe, feel free to hit me up. You can always find Gabe also on LinkedIn to see some of the examples that he talked about. They're linked in off his profile. But let's take some inspiration from what Gabe and HubSpot have done here and make something unforgettable together. And so until next time, keep vibing.